In introducing the idea of fractal patterns, it should be no surprise that principles, that values replay in very similar ways in a number of different realities, in a number of different contexts, because we're all part of nature. We're part of an underlying ecology. And the probability field that we're dealing with, whether it's a psyche or psychological probability field or a natural or agricultural probability field, certain patterns repeat over and over again. Sociopathic. Those who are most needy and vulnerable receive the least support, while those that are high status, high rank, and need less receive a lot of support. You can look at it in banking, where you have a few billion in the bank. They'll happily loan you a few million, no questions asked. You have a large doctor bill and are about to get evicted from your home during a pandemic, and you will not even get a few $100s because you need it. Similarly, people with fame, wealth, high-paid attorneys in the legal system, think Jeffrey Epstein in an incredible case of being able to sexually exploit dozens upon dozens of underage girls for prostitution and rape, getting all kinds of special treatment from the highest levels of government, versus a young African-American male thrown in jail for 5 years for taking a few puffs on a joint. So this pattern, the sociopathic pattern, is about, it's not about the other person and their need. It's about what's good for, whether it's the prosecutor or the bank, the one that has more authority. In other words, the person who is highest ranking and has the most money, whether it's Scientology or a successful pedophile such as Jeffrey Epstein, can just put tremendous amount of blackmail. Donald Trump would often serve 2-inch thick legal files for hundreds of thousands of dollars to a journalist for saying something he didn't want, and just bully the person into redacting important public information. So this is the sociopathic fractal pattern. Then we have hypocrisy. And in the hypocritical fractal pattern, you have a structure. You have a power base, a structure of law, a royalty, or whatever it is. You have a power structure. And every structure needs order. And the hypocritical fractal pattern is all about the fact that the rules that create the order for the cult do not apply to those at the top. Now, in some cases, this is legislatively written in black and white. The President of the United States is immune from prosecution. It doesn't get clearer than that. But you see this with parents. Parents talk about, don't eat too much sweets, but then they binge themselves with immunity at midnight. You can only watch a TV program after you do your homework. The parent breaks the agreement and binge watches all night. The kids can't drink and smoke. It's bad for you, but we'll ruin our own health. The senators or local officials are the only ones that don't get the speeding tickets when pulled over by local police. So it's basically a system that the rules apply to everyone else but us. And so low-level offenders of the system, violating from the system, get fired. Some paper boy gets fired for being, an hour late on the paper delivery, but the editor could make a major mistake and they'll cover it up. Chauvinism, the denigration of everything yin and or feminine, and the elevation of everything yang or masculine. So we see absolute absurd deviations from science. All human endeavors are motivated by feelings, the underlying drive to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. But you can learn more about calculus in a typical education than you do about the science and art of feelings, and how feelings become reality through emotion, through thoughts, through the behaviors they motivate. Feminine principles, relationships, eating well, parenting, psychology, the inner world, dreams. You can go through the entire cult institution without a single formal scientific hour spent educating in these domains. And other areas, how to get people to click more on videos. Oh, this is a huge thing, studied, billions every year, and, some of the highest paid people in the country are people figuring out how to addict members of the cult in order to make money at the expense of everyone else. So this deep ingrained pattern of chauvinism. If it's feminine, it's not as valuable as it's masculine. Even the statement, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me," is a complete and utter lie. Meaning every single one of us who is in any way in touch with the feminine principle understands that certain words and certain energies and certain intentions can scar and devastate a person for a lifetime, and that a stick or a stone would have 1/100th of the impact as a certain cutting statement in a certain way with the design to cauterize and castrate the sensitivity, the feminine psyche of the other person. Protecting norms. This instinctual drive to keep things familiar and expectable, that I want you to behave the way you always behave. I want things to function the way they've always functioned, independent of intelligence or underlying science. Blackmail, intimidation, and suppression, bribery, in order to hide secrets that disrupt the status quo, that disrupt the power hierarchy. So the more a secret, the more an information, a piece of information, would affect a change at the top of the power hierarchy, the more that information is attacked, paid off, avoided, discredited, etc. So that it's very common practice for politicians to destroy the lives of victims they may have raped or scandals they may have been involved in, rather than accept a change or acknowledge the abuses and malpractice that they're involved with. Corruption. First of all, we need to know what integrity looks like. So we have roles. We have a system, and the system generates a subset of roles. And so we might have a teacher. Well, the teacher's role is to educate the child. Now, corruption of the role is to destroy the child's education in some way, to weaken the child's education for a personal agenda. You have the role of banker. What's the role of the banker? To make sure there's no fraud, that everyone gets the right amount of money, that people's money is safeguarded. When a banker knowingly hires a criminal that's a risk to the banking, or engages in trades with the bank's money, which is really the people's money, in a risky way, you have the corruption of the role. When you have a parent who says this is for your own good, but it's really because I want to go get drunk with my boyfriend and I don't want to feel guilty, so do this, it's for your own good, you're corrupting the role. And so putting personal need ahead of the stated role that is granted with an authority and with an obligation. All authority comes with a responsibility in a healthier and democratic framework. And that's based on the trust in the integrity of the individual to put the role above their personal addictions, their personal fears, etc. Shaming the victim by implying that the violation was the victim's fault. So we come into chauvinism. Within the paradigm of chauvinism, you have the aggressor, the yang or masculine role, and you have the victim or the recipient of the aggression. So if I throw a rock at you and it hits you, I'm in the masculine role, I'm in the yang. We're not talking men and women here. I'm throwing the rock. Now you're in the victim role, meaning you get hit by the rock. And part of chauvinism elevates and honors the masculine. You see people being impressed by a criminal's ability to break into banks. But you also see people being shamed for not defending themselves. You idiot, you should have locked your car door, as opposed to, why are we in a cult that keeps creating car thieves? Not locking your door does not cause someone to be a sociopathic predator that steals your things. A cult that produces sociopathic predators that steal creates theft. And there's a tendency to blame and shame the victim, the woman who does not become homeless, for example, and leave an abusive family without the cult providing, a safety net for her or him to make that transition in a reliable way. The other thing we have is blame and avoidance by the majority around a people, and the seeking to scapegoat an individual. So this is part of the chauvinistic pattern. It's part of the sociopathic pattern. It's also part of the hypocrisy and protecting norms. And what it's basically saying is that the system is working beautifully. It's just out of nowhere. Nothing to do with us. It's nothing to do with traumatizing children. It's nothing to do with massive amounts of addiction that stems out of traumatic illiteracy and all kinds of people trying to cope with their traumatic symptoms. It's got nothing to do with the sociopathic protocol of including 0 hours of competent parenting in high school. No, the system is great. It's just somehow these bad seeds come into the system. If we can just kill them. Hitler started exterminating disabled, poor Germans before he went after the Jews. He rounded up people with disabilities. He rounded up children with mental, learning disabilities, and he killed them all, 70,000 Germans. Because the idea is basically, there's nothing wrong with the system. We just need to kill or blame or punish or execute, whatever, these weird scapegoats, these villains, and in doing so deny the circle's role in both creating and allowing the generation of the villain and the villainy, because there is an extraordinary amount of collusion. Just watch the Filthy Rich episode on Netflix, or any of these incredible sagas of authority figures and the public and the media, which just do not want to take responsibility for doing something because it's the right thing to do, but rather are following personal paths of expediency. We also have the fractal pattern of cowardice. And this pattern is about asking the small one, the young one, the powerless, the average person, to do more, to have more courage, more responsibility, more leadership than the parent, the leader, the teacher, etc. And so we have all kinds of situations where the parent, for example, cannot acknowledge their inadequacy. So they tell the child not to talk back, not to be ungrateful, and give the child a slap or an insult. It's all your fault. A mother is having problems with her husband, the person she chose and doesn't know how to communicate with in a psychologically illiterate culture. And rather than say, my husband and I don't know what we're doing, she'll angrily turn to the child and say, your father is doing this. And he'll turn to the child and say, your mother is doing this, as if somehow the child is supposed to be more responsible, more of an adult than the parent. And it's no different in political life, where you have politicians surviving on lies and incompetence and cover-ups for years until the people demand and show them how to do their job. Another fractal pattern is isolation. As, first of all, perpetrators deny their abuse and then deny the impact of the abuse, and then the cult fails to educate people about what causes the abuse, how to fix the abuse, and the impacts of the abuse, it creates a circle of ignorance, a circle of willful ignorance, in which the victim is misunderstood, abused in multiple ways, not only by the abuser, but then by the public that fails to respond, and feels completely unprotected and unloved. We have, finally, the fractal pattern of abandonment, where everyone involved in the relationship around issues has agendas and needs of their own that are more important than the agendas and needs of the most vulnerable. If I look at my county in Marin, California, where there are thousands of people who have been driven out of their homes because the local housing authorities, which have a monopoly on permits, law, and land use, have made it illegal to build a home for less than $650,000. You cannot do it and follow all the laws. And there is zero accountability for the thousands of homeless who cannot afford a $650,000 home, never will be able to afford a $650,000 home, and are increasingly finding themselves traumatized, shamed, with PTSD on the streets, and with lifespans shortened by 26 years per person. No one is going out and helping these people. There's no reward for it. But you will find all kinds of people, and the press will not write about this, because it's not popular to explore the underlying faults of the system. In this case, one of the faults being the idea that the money people have created as an idea and made in actuality is more important than the human beings who are capable of making it or who made it. That money is more important than the people who create it. It's a flawed paradigm. But if you again look at the sexual abuse cases, the reporters are not there because they care about this or that sexual abuse survivor. No, they're trying to get ahead on their paper. So who and how will they get ahead? They'll get ahead by sensationalizing, by taking certain kinds of photos. They have no interest in the psychological impact of their media on the victims. The prosecution often has no interest other than whether or not they look good or not. No interest in whether the court is actually an abusive environment for victims. The police have no interest unless their boss is going to reward them for helping certain types of things. Again, in my county, a homeless person can call up and police will not even bother to come out to investigate a crime because they're not going to get any reward for that. So everyone has their own agenda that trumps the fundamental need of the most vulnerable people. And if you understand these fractal patterns and where they come from, then you can predict a majority of outcomes around the most taboo and abusive crimes and acts in our culture.